Welcome to the Scale Ups podcast, where each week you get to hear Shawn Steele, professional CEO, growth mentor, and advisory board chair, unpack the strategies that successful founders have used to achieve scale in their businesses. Stay tuned as he interviews the entrepreneurs who've made it, learns from industry experts, and follows a group of founders still striving to scale.
G'day everyone, and welcome to the Scale Ups podcast, where we help first-time founders learn the secrets of scaling so they can fulfill the potential of their business, make bigger decisions with greater confidence, and maximize the value and impact they can create in the world. I am your host, Shawn Steele, and I am joined today for a second time with the wonderful Shawn Flynn, investment banker. How are you, Shawn?
I'm amazing. I'm feeling great. And Shawn, thank you for inviting me here. It's an honor to be here.
Mate, I'm thrilled to have you back. For those who haven't, I'm not going to go through Shawn's career history and stuff for you. For those who didn't hear the first episode with Shawn, please go back and listen to episode 47. It was released on the 6th of September. You learn all about Shawn's background, but fundamentally, Shawn's an M&A expert. He's an investment banker. He's done a lot of deals. He's been an entrepreneur and a founder, and sort of built his own company. So it comes from a bit of a different angle. And in our first call, we talked about a whole bunch of stuff, Shawn. We talked about the process for us. Really, we're trying to get into the mind of a seller, and we're thinking about, well, if I'm a founder and I'm going to sell my business, how do I get the best outcome for me? So part of last time was talking about the process and the team and who you need around you, the data room, and how important that is in the context of the deal. We talked about maximizing the value in the deal, of course, that's a big topic, right? There's a lot of strands from there. We talked about understanding your walkaway price. We talked about other deal elements that that can be leveraged to optimize value. And we're going to dig a bit more into that today, and also how to reduce risk for the buyer to help you sort of optimize your outcome. And we talked a bit about strategic and financial buyers. So we covered a fair bit of ground. And today what we're going to talk about is, first of all, management meetings. Who's expected, what's involved, who to involve, maybe who not to involve. I've seen some interesting people brought into management meetings. Terms that you can negotiate, again, to improve the deal economics, because I think that's a really interesting space that a lot of people don't really talk about. Where are some of the terms that you can negotiate to improve the overall economics to your favor? When you're selling a business, it's really hard to keep your eye focused on the main game, right? Like it's hard to keep running your business because it's a very distracting process, especially if the business is a bit smaller. So we're going to talk a bit about that, and then some secrets from the buying side. Some of the things that actually, as buyers, because both you and I, you obviously you're a professional in this space, and I spent a fair bit of time in being on the buying side. So what are some of actually the things that we might think about as a buyer that give us an advantage in the deal, so sellers can have that kind of in their mind. Might talk a bit about buyer psychology and motivations, which I think some of the things that come out in a letter of interest or indicative sort of letter of interest, things that will help us understand where someone's coming from, and finally, I guess just changes in the landscape, things that are changing the nature of the questions that are asked or the due diligence requirements, whether that's cybersecurity risks now or, everyone's got retention issues. So how does that sort of play out in their process at the moment? What about work from home and hybrid learning and the impacts on culture? How's that all playing out? So a fair bit to cover, but why don't we get stuck straight in, Shawn? Management meetings. For someone who's never on the selling side been involved in a management meeting as part of an M&A process, what's expected, who's involved, and if you were the founders selling that business, who would you consider involving in the process, if anyone, and who would you not involve?
Oh, okay. So we're going to cover an awful lot today. So I'm pretty excited about it, especially those last topics you mentioned, what's going to be taught or what's currently talked about a lot with the, work from home, work remote, IT, all those. So this is going to be an amazing episode for the question right there, management meetings. Okay. So that's very interesting. The management meeting. So think of it as you're running this process and you've just sent out maybe your confidential information memorandum, right?
Mhm.
And now people are asking for questions. Some of them will say, hey, before, let's go back steps, just reminder, everyone listen to that first episode, but you got your marketing material, you go out, you might send a blind profile, then sign an NDA, they get more information, confidential information memorandums built off the information in the data room. Then that leads to an indication of interest and then maybe a letter of intent. Then you find that one person going to due diligence. So
Yeah.
in that process, when the SIM is sent out, people start asking questions. One of the questions that they'll ask is, "Hey, I want to meet the founders. I want to meet the management team. I want to know them." And yes, there can be pushback going, "Hey, we're going to put that later on the process." But there are people that will insist, "Hey, I'm not going
Mm-hmm.
to submit an indication of interest until I get a conversation with the founders." Even if it's just a short one, there's
Mm-hmm.
people that will insist that. And so at that point, you have to decide, okay, in this process, are we going to allow this or are we not going to allow this? If we
Mm-hmm.
don't allow it, well, we're getting rid of some of those people. But if we allow it, it's taken those founders' time away from their business, right? It's kind of that distraction. But also, you can look at it as, hey, this is good practice for them for the later meetings. So use this as kind of that warm up for that World Series later on, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So say you're okay with the management meetings. Say you'll do a few before the indication of interest. Between that indication of interest and the letter of intent, you're pretty much going to have management meetings with everyone that you're serious right then. So there'll be quite a few in that gap. And
Yeah.
maybe there might even be a second round of, management meetings between the LOI and then maybe a final dance partner that you pick. So there could
Mm-hmm.
be a couple meetings here because, there could be a lot of money on the line, right?
Mm.
People want to get to know this team before finally saying, okay, here's the offer that we're going to submit. We're going to spend all this money and resources going through due diligence because we're serious buyers to them. And they want to, before doing all that, say, hey, you know what? We can't work with these founders, or
Mm.
hey, we're more impressed by these founders ever now that we've actually sat down and talked to them. And, it can go both ways. So for those founders, say there's an agreement to have one of these management meetings with a potential buyer. One, who should be involved? At the very beginning, you might want to keep it very simple. Towards, later on, they're going to want to meet everyone, though, all the key people, that C-level team. But at the very beginning, let's just talk about that. Say you're okay with having a 30-minute meeting, but they're like, we need an hour to have questions, or we need an hour and a half, or, you can kind of gauge their interest by how far they push for these meetings and how much
Mm.
time they want.
Very true.
And some people just go, "Yeah, here's my calendar link, find a time," and you'll look and there's 15-minute spots or 30-minute spots. You're like, "Well, what's going on here?" And then others you'll say, "Hey, we're only doing a 30-minute meeting." They'll go, "No, no, no, no. We're getting our whole team there, or we're getting these key
Mm-hmm.
decision makers. We want 90 minutes minimum to do this."
Yeah.
And you're like, "Wow, they're taking this serious." So it is a way to gauge early on who those real potential buyers are and who are the people who are just looking. I know I'm going all over the place, so you're
No, no,
gonna
that's
have to
good.
listen to this
Yeah.
episode 2 or 3 times still.
That's
So,
good. That's good.
back to the founders. Say they're okay to have this meeting. First thing you should do is tell that group that wants to meet them, "Okay, we're okay to meet you, but you need to submit a question set before.
Mm.
You need to give us what you wanna talk about, kinda the outline for the meeting. Why? You don't want this this team hasn't been in one of these meetings before to get some curveball out of left field and just go, "Wait, what? Wait, why'd you ask us that? We don't know what's going on." Make them
Yeah.
look bad. No, have everything in advance, and even say, "I honestly," because they're going to be busy running this business. Okay, we'll have this meeting a week from now, but you have to send us the question set 5 days in advance,
Yeah.
and we're
Like
going to
that.
review those questions first. Why? If they do it the night before, who are they? You've told them in advance, they agreed to it. This could be a
Mhm.
warning for later on. You know, have everything in advance. Use that with the founders and coach them. If you're one of the
Mm.
advisors, if you're working with them, go through those questions, hear them give feedback 2, 3 times to it, walk them through it because it's just like pitching to raise capital, right?
Mhm.
That first time you do it, you're going to be nervous. You're going to, what's going on here? But then when you
Mhm.
go through these questions multiple times, you're going to have that presentation. You're going to be calm. You're going to be relaxed. You're going to come off as professional. You're going to come off as confident. To
Yeah.
say there's 2 founders or 3 co-founders or, the CTO, CFO, and
Mhm.
CEO, they're gonna know when to answer what questions, how to take
Yeah.
turns. They're not gonna step on each other's feet and just kinda seem like they're arguing and bickering with
Mm.
each other. It's gonna be nice and smooth. So practice with everyone multiple times before those meetings, then go into the meetings. Now, on the other side, all right, the buyer side, who's gonna show up? This is a surprise in many cases, this early on especially. You might be thinking, "All right, we're gonna get, that key decision maker, that management director of this group, that's managing $1 billion." And out of nowhere, there's associate, and you're like, "Wait, what the? Where did
Mm.
this one guy come from? We have 3 people here, and they got 1 there. I thought
Mm.
Ask them in advance when you send the calendar
Who's going
invite
to be there?
or however, who's going to be there, what's their position. We'd like to know their LinkedIn. Do that the same with the questions. That get all this information in advance. Sometimes they might just say it's just going to be me or one person. Okay, go back to the team. Go listen. There's only going to be one person on their side. This could be a good practice for us, or maybe we avoid it. Maybe we just get their questions set and say, hey, we're going to answer these questions for you, give them back. We're really more interested in having more of your team there. It is
Mm.
kind of a discussion, but maybe just for the other side, this is kind of their vetting process to see how eager you are to work with them. It works
Mm.
both ways. Other times there's been, that first meeting where you thought one person was gonna show up. Next thing you know, it's one person, but they're in a conference room and there's 6 or 7 people on that table. And you're like, "Wait,
That's
wait, what's
right.
going on here?"
Yeah,
And then
yeah.
you start sweating when you see everyone in the room. But luckily, you've had many practices, you've gone over the question set, everyone's calm, relaxed, everyone's good, and they're having a dialogue.
Mm.
Now, sometimes these dialogues are those questions, but then, often tangents, but also the team itself very early on in many situations are kind of judging the personality of those founders.
Big time.
They want to see, hey, are these guys coachable? Can they work with us? What would that post acquisition really look like with our cultures merging together, with them working
Mm.
together? So a lot's happening. And we're not even at, you know,
Yeah,
we may not even be at the IOI phase,
yeah.
and this could just be that one meeting. So
Well,
that
it's
management
funny,
meeting.
Sean, when you're
Oh,
thinking about from a seller's perspective, they spent all this time in preparation and their due diligence. They've got all their data together, and then they've got the marketing material, and they think, we're selling our business. And you're like, yeah, but actually, to your point, that first management meeting, like any meeting you have, you get a gut feel really fast. Do I like this person? Am I willing to work with them? Do they seem influenceable? Do they seem professional? What is that going to mean for the rest of their business? Like if you've got somebody in who seems like really unprepared, scattered, can't answer things very succinctly, or waffles on forever, even that, like their inability to be succinct. I mean, we've turned down deals. I've turned down deals as buyers where I've just gone, yeah, that guy took 40 minutes to answer a question that he should be able to answer in less than 60 seconds. Like, can you imagine working with that guy over a period of time? Like, that would just be excruciating. He might have a great business, but we can't work with him. Let's just exit the process now and save us all some time. Like that, people don't realize that they're very much buying you. Now, whether you're staying for a long period, you may be exiting very relatively quickly. So that also probably plays into it, as to, well, how long are they going to have to work with me? But the reality is they are gauging the way your business is run based on the way that you present in these management meetings.
yep.
Yeah.
And one thing to add on that, it goes both ways,
Mm.
right? So it's not just the buyer analyzing the seller. The seller should be analyzing the buyer. And
True.
most people forget this to say, hey, at the very end, leave some time so we can ask your team questions. So we
Mhm.
can ask, and these questions you don't need to send these over to their side in advance. You just have your questions that you've kind of, hey, we looked at your website and we've seen your portfolio companies. How do we integrate with those? What's the onboard look like? What's
Mm.
the, where do you see us as that
Mm.
role moving forward 6 months in, a year in? And it's an opportunity for that team, the sellers, to also be analyzing the buyers and ask them questions. And uh, for some reason, I see a lot of people not actually preparing for this in advance. They're just thinking, okay, we're going to be interviewed. We're going to be the ones getting all the questions asked to us. When this is an opportunity for both sides to ask each other questions, joke around, see how they
Mm.
like each other, see if
Mhm.
they can really visualize what that relationship looks like. Because, well, I mean, Sean, and if you have a story or anything you'd like to share, but everything's all all rosy, and then once you hit due diligence, emotions fly on both sides.
Oh, yeah,
People start
totally.
second guessing. If you weren't friends before, you're not
Yeah.
going.
You're not
You're
gonna be on
not
the other
gonna.
side of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's absolutely a chance to build a bit of rapport, isn't it? And because the reality is once you're into negotiating terms and deals, like you've almost got the honeymoon on the other side and the honeymoon right up front, but in the middle, it's like your relationship is being tested from every possible angle. your patience is being tested, your boundaries are being tested, everything's being tested in the middle. So I agree, it is a chance to establish some rapport. But it is surprising how few people prepare well for management meetings on either side. Yeah, to your point, I know that we've had um, deals where we have put some junior people in front of people who may have been very smart and intelligent people, but it really annoyed the founders appropriately because the way they engaged was very transactional. There was no relationship there. It was like they just sort of came in with their 12 questions, like, okay, question one, question two. And the founders like, hang on a second, who am
Yeah.
I dealing with here? So yeah, we've made mistakes on the buying side too.
Because I mean, the founder in a situation like that, hopefully they're running a broad process and they're going to be talking to a couple of other potential buyers in the
Mm,
next either day, 2 days, and they're going to remember and compare you to them. I
totally.
mean, so if they're thinking, okay, their offer when the IOIs come, this one's a little bit better than this,
Mm,
but we have a little asterisk because we didn't like these guys, and
mhm.
you know th-
And
that
and on
guy,
the
why did he make that comment? It
yeah,
it could make a big difference.
and on the
Right?
flip side, I would say I've seen yeah the opposite of that, where if you've got a buyer who actually has bought numerous other companies, one of my first questions, well, it may not be right up in sort of measure meeting one, but I'd be wanting to talk to the founders who may still be there, who've sold to that parent company, to find out what their process was like. Because again, you're getting all of the sales spiel up front. Well, what was the reality when they were onboarded? How did they get integrated? Do they still have autonomy, or did they have everything stripped off them? Like all of those questions that you're sort of worried and concerned about. Maybe there's a way to find that out in that
Yeah.
earlier stage process.
Write it out and then be prepared to say, hey guys, at the end of this meeting, I want to ask you guys some questions and
Hmm.
lay it all out there. And
That's
if
it.
there's pushback, if there's hesitancy, if they're like, why do you
Mm,
want to know that? Red flags for later.
yeah.
Yeah.
So then, what about? Because I know there's a lot of other elements to that, but I'm also keen to keep progressing. What about terms? What about some of these terms that you can negotiate from your perspective? That, especially if you're patient, I know we were sort of talking about one offline, but if you're a patient, if you're some people are selling their business because they're at a stage where they just want to be out of it. They want to be out as fast as possible. They want maximum cash. They want limited deferrals of anything, right? So they're the ones that are like, oh no, I remember trying to buy a business off a guy who was a reasonable sized business with maybe 25-30 million dollars of revenue, reasonable EBITDA, decent sized team, and he was like, oh well, I'm going to be out in 3 months, and I was like, mate, that's not going to happen. But of course, as a buyer, you're going, why does he need to be out in 3 months? And I know that he's been in a process trying to sell for like a year. Why is he still in such a hurry to leave this thing? And so you really start questioning the motivations. And sometimes that's appropriate, and sometimes that's fine. I guess the point is those those buyers who still really believe in the business and maybe they're happy to stay involved in some kind of way or to essentially take more risk over time have a fair few more levers, I guess, that can be pulled to optimize an outcome for them. What are some of those levers in how you think about it, Sean?
Yeah. Great question. Because that's especially the timeline. Because I mean, I've been having quite a few conversations lately of just people that don't, going back to the first episode, understand the entire timeline of the process and that transition period where they're thinking, they might be older in their late 60s and they're thinking,
Mm,
I'm gonna sell this business and then go on vacation. And you're going, actually, you're gonna sell this business and then be around for 3 to 5 years. So you might want to, think about selling it now versus selling it in a few years from now when now you're 61, 62, then you'll be 65, leave
mhm,
when you're 68, 69.
mm,
It's one of those things where a lot of people don't understand that you're going to be asked to stick around to de-risk the whole transaction, and people, you know, one side one side wants to de-risk things as much as possible, which is understandable, and that goes back to kind of deal terms and price and everything else. So, I mean, there's endless things that could be negotiated.
mm.
And the more time and less pressure and better situation you're in, the stronger position you are to negotiate those things.
Yeah.
Right? If it's one of those 3 Ds, what is it? Death, disease, divorce. If
Mhm,
one of those things happens, well, I mean, the death one you can't really push too much, but divorce,
mm,
disease, you're not going to have you're not going to be in a position to really push back. You're going to have to kind of take what you're being offered. But if you're able to relax, take a deep breath, and things that you can negotiate can be anywhere from, that future employment agreement, what's your salary, what's your title, what's everything during after the transition, your vacation, all those things, to okay, let's talk about the terms of the agreement itself. How much is cash? How much is a seller's note? How much is an earnout, rollover? The seller's note, what's that tied to? Revenue, EBITDA, or is it just, employment for being around for a certain amount of time?
And give us an
There's
example just with I think in Australia, maybe sometimes we call it vendor financing rather than a seller's note, but just give us an
uh,
example, Sean, with a seller's note, where you've seen, maybe somebody get a better overall price, but some of that money's being deferred, through a seller's note. Give me an example of that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So that's and think of it this way. It's kind of that risk that risk to reward, right? If it's just all cash, then there's more risk for the buyer, less risk for the seller, right?
Mhm,
So if they want a higher price, well, maybe that seller will take a little bit less cash, but this seller's note, and that seller's note could be, say, over 3 years, you get this amount of money every month for those 3 years. Or you the first year is a holiday, you don't get anything, but then after that, every month you get this much, or every quarter you get paid this much, or every
mhm,
year, and then at the end there's this balloon payment. Or there's the way you could structure a note, there's infinite number of ways to
mm,
structure it, right?
mhm.
And but it's you have that debt component where there's recourse. So if it's
Yeah.
not paid, you can go back after the buyer. Whereas like an earnout, which is, more risky on your side, that would be tied to something. Maybe it's revenue or EBITDA, or like I said, maybe it's just you being employed there for a year on good standing without getting fired. Who knows? It's tied to something where there could be that instance where, okay, we're doing it on our side, so we're not actually gonna have to pay this person. And maybe
Yeah.
they fire you right before, maybe they don't hit numbers, maybe they, I don't know, spend all this money on this other thing, so this part of the P&L is lower, whatever it is. And then there's that rollover component where it's, okay, I'm taking some of my money or equity, put in this new entity that hopefully years from now there'll be some type of exit. So
Yeah.
that seller's note, I mean, think of those as the risk where, cash is the least risky for you, but most risky
Mhm,
for the buyer. Versus the
mhm.
other end, a rollover is most risky for you, least risky for the buyer. And
Yeah.
where you want to play in that spectrum, and that kind of ultimately, or no, that kind of adjusts that price
Yeah.
from the lowest price to the highest price, and everything in between.
And I think there's an interesting question in there. Let's say that you're selling to a strategic buyer. Some strategic buyers may be really happy for you to leave or want you to leave actually quite quickly. And some may really want you to be involved and not even be interested in a deal if you're going to leave at any point soon. So, I advised a client a year ago that was, the deal structure was really, well, we're going to take 30% now. We want you to stay in the business. We want you to continue driving this business for the next 5 years. We'll buy the other 70% in 5 years, at a pre-agreed multiple. So now we're both aligned on just trying to, maximize your earnings, over that period, and we're really working in partnership. I also advised on another deal not long ago where it was a strategic buyer, and because they had a whole bunch of capability in the same area as this business, so they understand the business model. They've got plenty of people. They've got plenty of other managers. They actually wanted to get the founders out of the way sooner rather than later, and that also aligned with what the founders wanted. So even though when the strategic buyer said, "Hey, well, we'd really like to defer some of this deal, we'd like to see this, we'd like to, we would like to take 30% of the buying price and spread that out over the next 3 years based on the earnings of the business," and they're like, "Yeah, but you want us out now, so we've got no influence over how this business performs in the next 3 years. So that doesn't work for us." And so to your point, it's nice to know that there are negotiable elements in there, but I mean, they can materially change the outcome of the deal in financial terms if those things actually play out. But of course, as you said, there's risk. If you take too much risk as the founder, and you defer things because you're really trying to get a total overall price that you think is higher, but you actually lose influence over being able to drive the performance of the business. You may find that the new owner actually does a terrible job in your business, and that sort of evaporates. So it's never easy to figure out, but it's good to know that there's flexibility in there.
There's two things that while you're talking, I was thinking of that your audience might like, and that one of them is the having that conversation from day one with you and your co-founders, whoever has equity, how flexible we are with the deal terms going into the deal. And that
Mm,
way, at the very beginning, because when you have these management, going back to the management meetings, they're going to sneak in at the end. Hey, just kind of wondering what type of multiples are you looking for? Hey, just kind of wondering what type of deal structure you're looking. They're going to try to sneak this in somewhere in that conversation to get an
mm,
idea of what to put in their offer to give them the best opportunity or kinda know where they stand,
yeah,
and just going into that going, "Yeah, we don't know," or, "Actually, we're very flexible, we do want a pretty big upfront cash component, but everything else, we are flexible, but it really depends on, who's sitting on the other side of the table." That's a pretty good answer, but knowing where your team, you, the other founders are on day 1 going in the process is gonna really help when narrowing down who you're gonna go to, the dance with, who and sorry, there's a plane going
mm,
on overhead, so
mm,
but
sorry,
having one of those conversations very early on of, "Hey, guys. Hey, team, how flexible are we gonna be with the deal structure? Are we looking for a cash exit for all of us, or are we okay with, some of this creative financing to get us a bigger value? Let's talk about this now so that while we're going out to market, we're targeting the
yeah,
outcome that we really want."
yeah.
That's one thing, and then the second thing was
And
that I was
sorry,
thinking
actually,
of
just on that point, Sean, you may also have a difference in the founder motivation. So let's just say you've got, 3 directors, and the company who's buying you really wants the main, the CEO to stay and to continue driving the performance of the business because that's just the way that they sort of have their organization or their portfolio. But actually, they're quite happy for the other two who they might have their own CFO and whole finance teams. They're quite happy to and maybe interested in the CFO exiting earlier or the CTO or whoever else it might be in that business. So the nice thing again is it doesn't have to be all or one. If you've got different motivations, it's about having a bit of clarity as to who's going to be flexible on what things. Because yeah, somebody might want to be out now, somebody might be really want to continue on for the next round.
mm, and that's also that was gonna be the second one I was gonna say, if you have that team or that company that's working without you, all the processes are there, it's a smooth oil machine, you going in and out is not gonna affect those terms, that price of this deal as
Mm,
much as this person, "Hey, we've discovered through our due diligence how valuable you are," or just having conversations, "We've discovered that really this company can't run without you here.
mhm,
You have to stay for
yeah,
3 to 5 years." Or the other one, "Wait, you go on vacation every quarter for a couple weeks? Huh,
yeah,
that's odd, and everyone here on your team seems to know what their, key performance indicators, KPIs are, and everyone knows what they're supposed to be doing, and they have all
hmm,
these process. Huh, there's a definite difference in value of you sticking around in company 1 versus company 2,
big
a
time.
and that's huge.
I think that's such a great comment. I'm in the middle of building this Scale Up's roadmap program, which talks, it's helping founders develop a growth strategy to maximize uh, growth rate, but ultimately valuation as well as scalability. And so one of the key points in there is to the extent that you've built management capability that can be relied upon, to that extent, you actually just have significantly more options. To your point, I've looked at a lot of businesses where the founders are very not only intimately involved in the business, where the business couldn't be done without them, but actually doing like many founders, right? They're hustlers. They're often doing 5,000 different things in the early stages of the business, and so they may have picked up all sorts of random jobs. Okay, so well, this founder, there's I don't know, there's co-founders. This founder does the accounting, the bookkeeping, but they also run IT, but they also run, they do partnerships, and then this one's doing marketing, and they're the CEO. And so you're going, hang on a second, it's not like I can just replace the two founders with two roles because they're actually doing, you know, part-time jobs of about 6 or 7 people. That actually becomes really difficult as a buyer to get your head around how you're going to de-risk that process. And the buyer, those founders go, yeah, we're really keen to get out as quickly as we can. And you're thinking, there's just no way that I'm not going to have a big cliff and that I'm going to have to deal. I'm going to have a lot of capability or have to add back in a lot of expenses into the deal, which probably kind of leads us almost onto our next point, is some of the secrets from the buying side. We're going to have to add back in a lot of expenses into the deal to get the EBITDA that I am basing my price on, to essentially account for the fact that I'm going to have to load in a whole bunch of money into this business to cater for these people who are going to leave, who are doing all these different jobs.
Yep. I mean, your audience, trust me, this conversation comes up so much where it's okay, if you two leave, I have to put in this person, this person, this person, this person. Now we have to adjust the EBITDA for their salaries, move it down. And yeah, we were telling you we're going to give you 5x multiple on that, but now the
Mm-hmm.
new EBITDA is this, and you're just looking at it. And this one group thought they were so smart by not hiring and just working harder,
Yeah,
but then when it comes time to sell, they're dinged for it. And
totally.
it's common.
It's really
It's all the
common.
time. Yeah.
I had a call, probably, actually, I think it might have even been after your episode. I had a colleague that I'd known for a while who rang me and said, "Hey, heard the heard the podcast with Shawn. You guys were chatting about. I've really been thinking about. I wanted to sell my business, and he goes, but I am so integrated into everything. And I've really just been trying to optimize my EBITDA, because I assumed the higher my EBITDA percentage, the better deal I was going to get." And I was like, how would you even have conversations with anyone in the due diligence process? Because you're doing like everything in this business. He's like, yeah, you actually have to invest in the business, probably reduce your avatar, but get to something where that it's actually got some decent management capability. So you've got some flexibility as to what role you play, because then you may stay on as a consultant. Maybe you stay on in part-time. Maybe you own one segment of the business because you're really good at sales and you're happy to, I don't know, lead the sales team, but not do anything else. Like, there's lots of options that become available as long as you can de-risk it for the buyer.
Mhm. And something with that is you might be scared that EBITDA is going down, but with the new multiple you're getting, the business itself probably is going to be worth more.
Yeah,
It just
that's
just throwing that out there. The
yeah.
number of buyers that will come in interested in it versus, your select few that's like, yeah, we're okay with this one guy doing everything, to this, oh wow, there's everything, the teams in place, the
Mm,
processes, the competition that will bid for that company.
mhm.
It's gonna be more valuable. I
Yeah.
mean,
100%. Yeah, it's
yeah.
really true. So what about, okay, a couple of, if we, let's put ourselves in let's put our buyers hats on, Shawn, you and I, and think about this from, like, I know when I've guided clients or had to advise them in the background on a deal, they're looking to learn from me what I might have been doing as a buyer that gives me an advantage in the process, so they can try to, mitigate that risk or kind of hedge against it in some way. And so I'm really interested to get your thoughts on things that help the buyer build a bit of advantage in the process. And you've mentioned a few already, and some of the questions they might ask early because they're trying to understand your terms, so they can negotiate around those, but kind of create a bit of positioning. One of the things that I see, and there's probably a lot of different examples of how this plays out, is time and delays of time. And what I mean by that is, um, when you're the founder, let's say, the due diligence team will probably say, "Hey, this is probably going to take us, like 8 weeks," and then, like, well, okay, 4 weeks for management meetings, 8 weeks of due diligence, and then we'll all be done. It'll all be done in 3 months, all tied up with a nice neat bow, and then, you'll be paid kind of quickly thereafter. And I don't think I've ever been in a process that's actually taken 3 months. I think that would be like a pretty incredible outcome. But the reality is, as the buyer, once the seller's engaged, and let's say they really like you and they really want to do a deal, if you can get to the right terms, they really want to make this thing happen. But once you're in due diligence, you're finding out all this new information. As a buyer, every month that we're going through due diligence, I'm getting updated reporting on how your business is performing. And so let's say the business has been going really well, but because your business is a little bit small, the reality is the due diligence process is a distraction. And actually, it's pretty hard to keep the focus on the main game of the business whilst you're in this due diligence process. And so sometimes things start to languish a little bit. And what happens for me is, I've got this wonderful spreadsheet that you've shown me of like how the business is going to grow, but you start missing a few numbers. And because I'm starting to see you miss numbers, I'm like, okay, well, I really want to see then the month after that as well. And so maybe things start to take a little bit longer. It takes a little bit longer to get back to you or ask for a few more things. And each month of delay that starts to creep in is starting to annoy you, because you're losing focus on the main business. And you start to get to the point where actually you really want this process to end. You might really want to do a deal with me, but actually you getting annoyed and you actually almost start to become more pliable to maybe some of the terms being flexed because I'm going, oh, the business isn't going quite as well as it was
Mhm.
or quite as well as you forecast, so now we're getting a little bit nervous about the multiple and the risk to us. And so you can see this kind of playing out where the delays actually really play into my hands as a buyer
Mhm.
and out of your hands as a seller. What are some of the things that you see or that you use, I guess,
Well
um, as a
well,
buyer?
let's just go to the management meetings. Let's just go right
Mhm.
back to there. It's not uncommon for them, "So why do you wanna sell the business?" And the founder to give up way too much information. "Oh, I'm about to have my first kid." And you're
Write
like,
that down.
"Oh, why did you say that?" Like, or, me and my wife are having problems, we're going through the, tough time right now. It's like, like, what?
Mhm.
They could be thinking on their side, "Okay, person's gonna have second or third kid coming up in the next 3 months. Okay, we post due diligence, he's gonna be stressed out, he's just gonna okay, we'll just sit on things a little." There's so much going on in their personal life. Or another thing is during this time, I'm sure you've seen it. Maybe, that 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 key team that's running the company, once you start saying, "Hey, we're gonna sell it," one person checks out.
Mm.
One person, that of that team is just like, "Oh, if we're gonna sell, I've already cashed this check in my mind." Gets lazy on their work, starts missing things.
Mhm.
Or, "Hey, after this is all done, I'm not gonna have a job. Why am I gonna really work that hard? I gotta start looking for something else."
Mm.
You have no idea what's going on with everyone there and even significant others. Significant others might have already cashed out going, wait, we're finally selling after you've worked 80-hour weeks for the last, 7 years. Oh my gosh, I can't wait for this to be over. I have our plans. And then as things drag on, it's, hey, honey, dear, you've told me we'd be done by now and we'd be traveling
Mm.
and there's more fighting at home.
Mhm.
You come to meetings all upset because of the night before. And you're just looking at it going, my life is falling apart here.
Mhm.
When are we gonna get this done? So
Mhm.
it that time is key, and you and the other co-founders or other people involved might start arguing. It's very the entire process is very emotional,
Mm.
ups and downs the whole way, and the littlest things in one of the management meetings, one of the due diligence meetings could be interpreted by someone different and then goes back to their team and they go,
Mhm.
I'm not interested in this more. Did you hear what they said that last minute? They said this. You're like, well, that's not a big deal. I think you're interpreting it wrong. No, no, no.
Mhm.
And you have no idea where that emotion's coming from. It
Yeah.
could be, three layers backs for some reason, something, but it's affecting everyone. And
As
and
you
then you have the other side, the buyers are like, we do this all the time.
Yeah.
We're gonna do like 4 of these acquisitions this year. I don't, we missed this.
Yeah.
Nope. Yeah. So it's
Yeah, yeah. No biggie, but yeah, exactly. They've got options, right? Like
yeah.
you're the one selling. You've only got one asset to sell. They've probably got 5 or 6 processes running, maybe even at the same time. And so you know
Yeah.
what? If they can things do start to blow out, sometimes for no other intention, or their capacity starts to get a bit constrained, and maybe one of the other deals is looking a bit better than your deal. So it doesn't mean they don't want to do it, but it starts to slow down. And I actually, it just jumped out to me that it's very similar to a property transaction, isn't it? And you use the 3 Ds or the 4 Ds. You don't want the people buying your house knowing that there's been a death and that actually all the kids are fighting over it and they just want this thing done and they're probably going to be pretty motivated to take a low rate. You don't want them knowing that you're going through a divorce and therefore it's a bit ugly and the best thing for your life would be for it to settle quickly, even if you're taking a lower amount. Debt, you don't want them knowing that you've racked up some gigantic debt somewhere else. Or to your point, that they've already spent the money mentally. Like one of the guys I was buying a business off, he'd already set up another business and he was essentially in a different country. So he's already spending money on it. It was already costing him money. He'd mentally moved on and he'd sort of checked out, but he really needed this to sell so that he could go and focus on that other thing. And so all of a sudden he's becoming pretty motivated and we know what those motivations are. So again, they become a bit more pliable.
Yeah.
Um, what else from your perspective, Sean, if there was something else that you think about that creates a bit of advantage for you as the buyer, um, where else do you
Uh,
think you might play or push a little bit?
I mean, a lot of the buyer, it's not a lot, but another way is just having those conversations once again where one side's given too much information. Hey, tell us what the other offers are. hey, where do we
Mhm.
stand in the other offer? What kind of structure deal terms are they coming in on?
Mm,
Things like that. And how many are in this process right now?
mm,
Is it just us and maybe one or two others, or is there five
mm.
others? Can you kind of tell us where and a lot of times it's funny. People just if they get asked a question, they just blurt out an answer, and you're
Yeah,
like what?
yeah. That's helpful to know. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And
So
I guess that's where, you're because remember that you might have a sell side advisor helping you, upfront, find a buyer, maybe in the first couple of management meetings, but they're not typically in every meeting from then on. So once you get into due diligence, usually you're dealing with the vendor or you're dealing with the person selling the business, and they don't have an advisor in the room every single time. So they're not probably, that sort of upfront coaching and upfront guidance often diminishes pretty quickly. But that's once you and there's a bit of rapport building, and that's when some of that information starts to unravel and be shared. And to your point, it can be incredibly helpful um, to know where you stand in that process, because you know what they like, you know what they don't like, if they really want to do a deal with you and they don't really like maybe some of the other deals are better, but they really don't like the other people, but they really like you guys, and all of that stuff's super super helpful. I think one of the other well, we already talked about the fact that I think those adding costs back in is almost a sort of, you're sort of tripping over your own foot as a buyer. Like if you've left the door open for people doing multiple jobs, or you've been, there's a whole bunch of things you've built into the business that when the other, when the buyer takes over it, are going to either need to be costed back in, or they're no longer going to be relevant. All of those affect the normalized EBITDA, meaning the EBITDA that actually the price is going to be based on. And so if there's a whole bunch of reasons for them to add money back in, the EBITDA that your multiple's being
yeah.
based on is going down every day.
Mm,
One thing I did notice, I've seen a couple of times actually work in a buyer's favor, Sean, uh, is having or I don't know if it's unreasonable, but almost like an unreasonable minimum price. Like I've watched a guy sell a business, and he was like, this business is going to be sold for $20 million. I'm not interested in any discussions whatsoever about it. If and he would be right up front with the buyers. He's like, that is my absolute minimum price. So if you want to enter a conversation about something different, let's not have the conversation whatsoever. And what was interesting is I watched this deal occur, and because the buyers actually really wanted to buy this business, and it was a great asset, and it was a hot market, and everyone was trying to do deals, and it was hard to get good assets, I saw the deal team start to actually almost manufacture ways to get to his price in a way that was probably not as advantage for not as good for the deal team, but to ensure, because they knew he was just going to be completely inflexible. You had people essentially almost managing upwards and selling internally, going, "Hey, if we want to be part of this deal, we have to get to this price. So let's figure out how to get to the price for this guy." Which they wouldn't have done had he not kind of put a minimum on the table. I also know, of course, that could knock a whole bunch of buyers out, and it could work totally against you. But have you seen anything like that play out?
yeah.
How have you seen that play out?
So going back to the deal terms that we're talking about earlier and the flexibility there. I mean, I guess it's that one saying, I name the price if you or was it you can name your price if I can name the terms.
Mhm,
And if the person says, "Okay, this is our price," it's okay. How can we de-risk it enough to get the terms so that we can hit that price? Whether it's okay, we'll do an earnout over this enormous amount of time, which might seem unreasonable, but we
mhm,
can get to that price. Or hey, we count the rollover, this much equity in the new entity, and say we have this astronomical exit. 5 years down the line, you get the money back at that number that you want. It
mm,
People are you yourself said it, can be very creative in getting to that number, but at the same time, is that the best number for the
for
seller
you,
when
yeah.
they really start thinking about the risk that they're taking on for everything? Uh, I mean, buyers are creative. People are creative. They'll get there, but really understanding, okay, if I get into this number, is it best for me, my situation? And sometimes it's hey, go back, have that talk with that tax advisor, the wealth advisor, the estate planner, all those, and see like, hey, maybe getting these terms would be better for you at a lower valuation to have the lifestyle you want. But no,
Mm,
I've seen it where there's that seller that's like, this is my minimum, get there, and then the buyers come around and go, okay, to get to that number, this is how creative we're gonna have to be.
Yeah.
to get even near that. And
Mm,
if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But
mm.
that's the conversation that having that line in the sand could have a lot of conversations with a lot of professionals before you want to do that. I guess
Yeah, I
that's the
agree.
way to put it.
Yeah. Yeah. Occasionally it can work out, but yeah, many times it might create a rod for your back in the
Mm.
process. What about so Mitchell, I'm conscious of time, Sean, because I could just chat to you all day about this. What about some of the changes in the landscape in buying? So some of these, I guess, emerging areas, be it cybersecurity or retention issues that everybody's facing at the moment. Everyone's struggling to find staff and struggling to keep staff, and work from home's become a big, challenge for lots of businesses to sort of figure out how are those things playing out in the process? How are they affecting conversations, due diligence, negotiations? What are you seeing?
They're huge. They're huge. We're having conversations of, hey, this staff, was it pre-pandemic hiring, during pandemic hiring? Now, what's the percentage that are fully remote? What's hybrid? What's back to the office? W- The, for when you went remote, what type of IT infrastructure, what was changed in that? Questions and questions about the last 2 years and how the companies reacted to it are
Mm,
huge. Because I mean, if you have that company where, well, one, a lot of people, not, well, I keep saying a lot, but people hired a lot of contractors, and here in the states, contractors, are some states that are very you know friendly to contractors. There's other states
mm.
that are not, and if you're in a state that's not friendly, there's could be a lot of it could be very difficult to switch them from 1099 to W-2s and still hit the numbers
And do you
you
mean
mentioned
by
it,
that,
and
because the Aussies
make
wouldn't know that one, but is that really, moving somebody from an independent contractor to an employee because they're essentially so dependent on the company that, in Australia it's called sham contracting.
mm,
Yeah, where somebody is fundamentally, they're really working for you, but they've kind of got the aura of a contractor, and then all of a sudden you find you're obliged, you've got a whole bunch of liabilities that you weren't planning on, like their superannuation payments and a range of other problems. Yeah.
yep, that's coming up in
Mm,
conversation.
mm.
There's you name it,
What about on retention? Like maybe another way to think about it is, what are some of the things that, in those questions, because you're obviously getting a whole bunch of information about how they've performed during this period and what's changed in the business and how they navigated it. What are some of the things that, if you hear them, make you a bit nervous because maybe well, that's obviously one, like, okay, they've taken on a whole bunch of contractors and maybe they've got some liabilities now that are problematic. What else are you sort of looking for that might give you some red flags?
hmm, employee one is the one that's coming up the most in conversations.
Hmm.
That's big. Other ones that are coming up, I mean, because a lot of that evolves, or well, the length of time they've been at the company, but this is
Yeah.
also if they were hired before. Because I mean, people are able just to move around to so many companies now. It's not geographic
Mm,
as before. That
mm,
people are really worried post acquisition. Who of these people are going to stick around? And when
yeah.
lights go off and
True.
they go home, are they going to come back the next day? Especially
Yeah.
now that their skills are demanded and they can work almost anywhere in the country or world.
Yeah.
I mean, conversations of that, and
Probably cybersecurity risks. I'm also noticing, I've had a few conversations
that's
with people
huge.
about, you know, I guess, in the smaller business segment, people always assume that's kind of like something that big companies deal with, and that's their
Mm.
sort of problem. But all of a sudden, I mean, it's pretty clear worldwide that those risks are pretty real at all sorts of sizes. You may be a small company, but dealing with really sensitive information, and or not be compliant. So do you sort of suss out their approach to cybersecurity? Do they have consultants? Do they have audits? Like, how are they approaching that? Is that a key part of your risk assessment?
Yeah, I mean, do they have cybersecurity insurance? Did they get
Hmm.
that before? Because it's so much difficult to get it now. Have they done an IT audit? Is everything up to date, compliant?
Hmm.
The company that's acquiring them, does the systems they're using actually match with the other? What's that transition look like? Um, I mean, a lot of those conversations
Hmm.
have come up, and I mean, IT luckily is one of those things where a lot of companies during the pandemic thought, okay, we need to have we need to look into this. We keep hearing about all these companies getting hacked and having to do Bitcoin ransoms or whatever,
Hmm.
or the person that was working a second job during the pandemic with one company's computer and now opening up bridges or breaches everywhere
Mm,
and
mhm.
putting everything in you know, I don't it's kind of crazy. I don't think there's something that's not coming up in
Yeah,
conversation. I mean
yeah.
that I think that would be is your team still even in the US? Are they,
Mm,
are they working from, Colombia now? Are they working from
mhm,
do they plan on coming back to the office? What's the transition look like? How are we going to incorporate the two? We have one company that's, during the pandemic might be from one of the Midwestern states, Kansas, and never really had a lockdown, acquiring a company from Silicon Valley where the people still think it's work remote only. How do we
mm,
incorporate these two when this one acquires the other? And this
mm,
group sees, wait a second, they all get to work remote. Why can't we? Hey, they have to go to the office. We don't want to do that. This is scary.
mm,
And those conversations, and how do you integrate the two? Do you there's it's kind of I'm not sure for your listeners, but the US went through a very interesting time the last couple years where each state kinda had their own reaction to what was
mhm.
going on, and with that reaction, I mean, some states literally they went home for 6 weeks and then spent the next 2 years back as if nothing was going on. And then
Yeah,
other states are still in semi lockdown in one way or the other, where people are wearing masks to the gym, where people are asked to present vaccine booster certification before
mhm,
entering events, or it's really different and it's state by state. So
mm,
imagine one company from one state acquiring a company from another state or merging with a company from there where they faced 2 different things, one fully adjusted remote, one stayed in the office the whole time.
yeah,
And whereas before there was a little difference in culture with, red states, blue states, or however you look at it, now that divide is so much greater than ever before.
mm,
And
mm,
it's really interesting to kinda have these conversations with investment banks from anyone from these other states and just kinda say, "Hey, what's the situation you're going through pre and post integration.
yeah,
What are those conversations like? Are there bonuses or different pay structures for people that are going to the office versus remote? It is, what's the flexibility now before? What is the next 6 months? What is the C level team? What are the investor, the board? I don't know, it's
mm,
just conversation at every level. And I mean, I'm not sure what's going on over there. I can't say, but here, these conversations, I was just on a panel last 2 weeks ago that had chief people officers from some companies in Silicon Valley
mm,
just debating over best practices of, "Hey, this company's back in the office so that the younger employees have those mentors with the older employees, and are able to
mm,
actually have that culture, and it's more of an
mm,
impact, and there's that glue in keeping everyone together." And
yeah,
then you have the other employee or company is like, "We've been fully remote this whole time. We have the best talent from all around the world at a
mhm,
cheaper price, and we're building this great." And you're listening to this, and you're like, "Well, how would you integrate the two? How would
yeah,
you?" It's
yeah,
I don't know. It's
yeah,
it's
that's a real interesting. That's yeah, that's super interesting. And it's a minefield, right? Because there's no perfect answer right now. It's more about what's the implications, how's it impacting the business now, but also how's it going to impact it in the future.
yeah, we don't have the data or anything, and people are
No,
just
that's right.
guessing.
Yeah,
It's
we're
all
all just
gut
guessing.
feeling, like, "This
Yeah,
is how I feel it's gonna be." It's like, "Wait a
yeah,
second."
yeah. Get your crystal ball out. Well, last question for you, Sean, is just around. We're almost backtracking, like pre-management meetings, but I know you have some thoughts, which I think is really great for people who are sort of first timers in this process. One of the early things that are happening is you're getting a letter of interest, or a letter of. You probably use slightly different language, but you're getting a kind of indicative interest in the business before maybe you've got a formal, non-binding indicative offer. Um, what are some of the things that you try to coach people around making sure there's sort of consistency in those letters so that you can elicit as much information as possible that's helpful for you as the seller?
Great question. This is key. This is one of those things where I see a lot of people, they'll get an unsolicited acquisition offer presented to them, and there'll be so much information missing from that. You're like, ah. Whereas if at the beginning you said, okay, if you're gonna give me an offer, whether it's that indication of interest, LOI, have it this structure. Tell me
Yeah,
the due diligence period, your estimate. Is it 60 days? Is it 90, 120? And that once you see these numbers, those could be red flags, those could be follow-up questions, that could be anything. You know, where's this money coming from? Debt equity, do you have it? Are you going out to raise? What is that? What's the idea for the founders for that transition period?
Mm,
What's the valuation that you're giving to this company? Is it based on a multiple of EBITDA? If it's based on revenue, what have as detailed as possible this kind of structure going, hey, when you submit your indication of interest, please have it in this format: one, two, three, four, five, six, all the way down. Yes,
mm,
it takes time, but the other side's gonna look, "Oh my gosh, these guys are more professional, they're working with
mhm.
someone, we gotta take this more seriously," and it's also a structure for them to go, "Okay, as long as we follow this, we know what to do." It
Yeah,
tells you, "Okay, there's all this information given on this acquirer that we can, then use to compare apples to apples with everyone else." Whereas this one, if everyone was just to do their own, this one might have this information and lack all this other stuff. This might have this other information and lack all this other. But if you're actually going line item to line item, okay, days to close. Okay, sources of funds. Okay, um, valuation multiple of EBITDA, and
mhm,
you can see it all compared. You have a lot more, and then take notes from the management meetings and everything else that we were talking about.
mm.
You have a lot better idea of who you really want to end up with and who the best offer is based on going back to your earlier conversations of your flexibility on deal terms, what your key outcomes is,
Yeah,
and you can really match it all up, and that information is given to you in a format that you can dissect and get your answers from. So
that's
it
right.
it just makes
And even
everything
just
just so much
even just
easier.
even one example that I know you and I talked about offline, just the combination of a couple of those items, the days to close and the days of due diligence, how long they want for due diligence and what their sources of funds are. Well, if you've got 4 out of 5, potential acquirers have got the money, that's sitting on their balance sheet and they've got it available and sitting in the bank, and they only need 60 days versus somebody else who says, "Oh, I need 120 days, and actually we don't have the money, we've got to go and raise capital for it." You're like, "Huh. Well, that's that's a less favorable looking potential acquirer. Do we even want to deal with them? Well, at least you've got something that you can go back and ask before you enter into conversations. I think it's
Mhm.
a really helpful process of fleshing some of that stuff out up
Oh,
front.
and the crazy thing is, during the process, there's always a couple of those outliers, and you're like,
Mm,
"Oh my god, this offer is so amazing, it's so much higher than everything else. This is the one we want." But if you were to get all that information in advance, you go, "Wait a second.
mm, yeah,
That number may be that high, but it's most likely not gonna happen."
yeah, true. And I've seen it the opposite too, where somebody had come out with a multiple of their indicative offer at start was a multiple of 5, and what it ended up being actually by the end of the process was 7.
Mhm.
And you kind of went the other way. So yeah, interesting, mate. I could chat to you all day. I'm super grateful, Sean, for your time. It's such valuable information. Founders who are building a business, there's not many founders who will go through a sale process more than once. I always think of it's kind of like DIY in your house. It's like, well, if you're going to lay a new deck or, I don't have to pull down a wall, you're probably only going to do it once. So you've got to try to get as much coaching up front so you optimize because you're probably not going to do it multiple times unless you're a professional builder. Well, unless you're a professional seller of businesses, you're probably not going to do this more than once or twice. So getting as much information as you can to help you optimize the outcome is really valuable. So huge thanks from me. How should people follow along with what you're doing or get in touch with you if they wanted to interact with you?
Best way, if you're watching the video of this, there's a QR code in the corner of my screen. Scan that. That connects to my LinkedIn. If you're listening to the podcast, just connect with me at Shawn Flynn, ShawnFlynn. Shawn Flynn SV on LinkedIn, or it's Shawn Flynn Investment Banker. I forget. But if you want some information or to listen to another podcast, is it okay if I plug? Check
Absolutely.
out
Yeah, please.
the Silicon Valley Podcast at thesiliconvalleypodcast.com. Connect with me, listen to some of my episodes. We're gonna have Sean on it in the future, as soon as
Look
he,
forward to
agrees to be on it. But,
it.
yeah, so just I'm open for a conversation, honestly. Connect with me a year, 2 years before you're thinking of doing any of these transactions. Well, connect with Sean first, have him help you out with your company, and then, I'd love to talk to you later, but I'm open for a conversation. And, more than anything, Sean, I wanna thank you for having me on your show, and, if there's any opportunity to come back, please let me know.
Absolutely. It's been my pleasure. And thanks again so much, Sean Flynn. folks, if you enjoyed the podcast today, best thing you can do really is to tell somebody else about it. You probably, if you find us on LinkedIn, you see we have all sorts of little videograms, just send it to somebody else who you think is going to find it valuable. That's the best thing you can do. That gets Shawn Flynn's knowledge into their head and helps them out in their selling process. So thanks very much. Of course, you can leave us a review, and we always love that too. But thank you very much, Shawn Flynn, and I hope to be speaking again with you soon, mate.
Me too. Thank you.
G'day everyone, just a couple of quick things before you go. If you have questions that you'd love myself or an upcoming guest to tackle about challenges that you're facing in scaling your business, please just jump straight on the website, scaleupspodcast.com. You can record your message straight from your mobile by hitting the button on the right-hand side of the page, or you can just email them the old-fashioned way, questions@scaleupspodcast.com. And just a quick reminder, nothing we spoke about today constitutes financial or business advice. If you are considering making big decisions in your business, seek out a professional who can look at your situation in detail and make sure you're getting sound, personalised advice. Thanks for listening. Look forward to being back in your podcast feed next week.